Hey, we're here with Matthew Charles. Matthew and I have just been talking about just issues of life and criminal justice reform and his experience being incarcerated. Um, Matthew, go ahead and tell us a little about your life, where you grew up, and some of the things you and I were just discussing.
Okay, my name is Matthew Charles. I was born and raised in North Carolina. Uh, I grew up in a very tough household. My father was an alcoholic. He was very verbally and physically abusive to my mother as well as my siblings. So I stayed in that type of situation until I turned 17 or 18. When I turned 17, I believe it was, in high school, I actually signed up for the Army. And once I graduated, I was able to go into the Army. So I was out for about 30 days before I transferred over to boot camp. And the reason I signed up was I was looking for an escape out of that verbal and physical abusive situation. And to me, that was the respectable way to do it.
And your brothers, you got some brothers that's in the military, right?
Yes, my youngest brother, he did likewise. And my oldest brother, who is also deceased, all three of us did the same thing, all three boys,
Yeah,
as a way to get out of that situation, as well as not bring, you know, the reproach upon the family. We just went on and joined the military.
yeah. What you were telling about your dad growing up, about your dad's how rough he was. Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
I would say, as far as to my, you know, memory going back to 4 years old, my father was always a strict, very verbal and physically abusive person. There were times where I would wake up and see the signs of the abuse on my mother or on me and my siblings. So I seen that all the way up until I graduated high school and
Yeah,
left the household myself.
yeah. Well, you when you were incarcerated, you said that in the county jail, you kind of had a change of heart in a sense. You want to elaborate a little bit about that?
Yes, that was like unsuspected on me as
Yeah,
unexpected on me as well because throughout that whole period, I didn't necessarily believe in God because God never showed up in my family or in my household and spared me or my siblings or my mother the abuse. So once I got arrested in 1995 for the federal offenses, I ended up going to the county jail, and I guess that was a time where God had selected to come and visit me because things started happening that were unnatural, coming from a standpoint of me not even believing in God.
yeah,
Now I'm there, I'm quiet, my heart is being prompted by God. I attended the jail Bible studies, I heard what they had to say. Then I started reading the Bible while I was there, which was like one of the only books in the county jail was a Brown King James Gideon Bible.
yeah,
And as I started reading it, I started realizing why I was as I was and why my father was as he was. Then I surrendered my heart and life over to the Lord Jesus Christ
yeah,
in February of 1996. And from that standpoint, everything changed.
yeah,
I started learning more about God. I started going to the Bible studies more. I went up one time that the pastor at one of the Bible studies, I asked if anybody want to come up and give their life over to the Lord. I had already done so privately in my cell, but as a profession or a confession of faith, I went forward and done that. And then from that point on, God just continued to be with me and work with me. And I was there in February 1996, in December 1996, because in the federal system there's a process that you go through even getting the PSI, which is the pre-sentencing investigative report, done. So once in December of 1996 came, I was given a 35-year sentence, which was 420 months for the federal
wow,
gun and drug violations that I had actually done.
yeah,
At that time, I was disheartened, I was hurt behind it, but at the same sense, I had like an inner peace because now I had Christ living on the inside of me. And I didn't know what Christ was going to do, but I knew that I wasn't going to just abandon this peace.
yeah,
So once I left the county jail and was taken to Terre Haute, Indiana to start USP Terre Haute, Indiana to start serving that sentence. Once I started serving that sentence, I was in an environment that normally I would have thrived in because USP Terre Haute, that's high custody facility. In other words, they call it the Terror Dome. They had a whole lot of violence on that institution. So the day that I arrived there and got off of the bus, I knew something in me was changed because when I got off the bus, I could sense it, the
yeah,
tension that was there as opposed to being a part of it. Normally, I wouldn't sense anything because that was my normal environment. So I knew something was different about me.
Yeah.
So I went in there and I just continued to do what was right. I went over to the chapel, found out what time the Bible studies were, found out what time the church service was, and I started looking for other fellow believers on the compound and
Yeah.
found some. So we started fellowshipping together.
Yeah.
And then as a product of that, I started taking Bible study courses so that I can learn more about the faith.
Yeah.
And as I continued to do that, doors started opening for me. I was given the opportunity to be a GED clerk. And as a GED clerk, I helped, I would say, nearly 100 people receive their GED equivalency. Because in federal prison, if you don't have your high school diploma or your GED, once you come in, it's mandatory that you go to classes to receive it. So I was able to assist those people to be able to do that. And that also opened the door for me to be a law library clerk. So throughout my course of incarceration, I went to several different federal institutions, but when I did so as either a law library clerk or a GED tutor. And I was able to help different people in different places that have come from different walks of life. And I was there for 20 years and 6 months. And then the laws changed, which lowered the crack cocaine to powder cocaine ratio from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1. And when it done so, it allowed me to be released from federal prison because I had already satisfied the amount of time for the 18 to 1 equivalency. So after that took place, I was released, but the prosecutor appealed my release and said that it didn't apply to me. So therefore, I was out for nearly 2 years. While I was out, I was doing everything that you would want a new productive member of society to do that have come out of former incarceration. I was working. I purchased a Jeep that I was driving to and from work. I was volunteering my time and services, and I was active in the community,
Yeah.
mentoring to people, just telling them about the pitfalls of the lifestyle that they were in. But the prosecutor still appealed my sentence, and he ended up winning. And the court ordered me to return to prison to serve a remaining 10 years because on the 100 to 1 ratio or the non retroactivity of that law, I still would have had to serve 31 years of that 35-year sentence, and I only served 20 years and 6 months of it.
Wow.
So once I was ordered to go back, the news media got a hold of it, the Nashville Banner, also Julietta Martinelli of NPR, and she came out and she done the story. And when she had done the story, she brought facts to my attention that I hadn't even focused on. She was like, so you did 21 years of incarceration and you didn't have any infractions or disciplinary reports throughout your period of incarceration, didn't have a one.
And what was her name again?
Julietta Martinelli.
Okay.
And so he was like, she was like, so you didn't have any of these infractions, any disciplinary reports. You worked as a GED tutor, you worked as a law library clerk. Why are they requiring you to go back? And I was, well, it was just the law. It's just what, the letter of the law says. It's just punitiveness. It's not that this person has been rehabilitated. It's the fact that he is not satisfied. A truth in sentencing means you do every day of that sentence or 85% of it, and you're not released until you do. Because at the time in the federal system, there's no such thing as parole. You do 85% of your sentence, regardless what the sentence is, or regardless if you change. Now, the First Step Act did change the majority of that, but the First Step Act was not actually law at the time that I was serving sentence. So therefore, I was ordered to go back. The story went out. Representative Steve Dickerson here of Tennessee had caught wind of it, and he asked the president to get involved with it. Then there were some other celebrities that got involved with it. Kim Kardashian,
Yeah.
even Judge Kevin Sharp, federal Judge Kevin Sharp, who had actually reduced my sentence and allowed me to be free in 2016, as well as my attorney, Mariah Wooten, and Michael Holly here in Nashville. They just was continuing to fight on my behalf, saying this is not right. And the more that they pushed the envelope forward, the more people became aware of it,
Yeah.
and the more people became outraged and was like, this is a grave injustice. So when I went back to serve that remaining 10 years, I was in Grayson County, which is in Leachfield, Kentucky, being held over to go back to federal prison to serve that remaining 10 years. But at the same time, the judge was like, well, let's wait and see. Let's hold him over in limbo and see what take place. My old sentence had been I had been resentenced to it 35 years all over again, as opposed to the 25 years that I received once I had the sentence reduced. So, well, I was at Leachfield, Kentucky. I just continued to do what was right, continue to hope and pray. Then I heard about the First Step Act, and that was my first time hearing about the First Step Act. But the First Step Act initially was a bill that allowed you to receive good time credit for your rehabilitative efforts, whether it was a faith-based program, educational program, or vocational program. And at the same time, I had a Georgetown professor named Sean Hopwood who took my case pro bono, who had also stated that at that time he was working with the White House to get the First Step Act passed. So he was working with them. He was like, so I'm going to present your situation to the president. And we had belief that the president was going to grant me a clemency or a pardon. So at this time, I was being held over in Leachfield, Kentucky. Thanksgiving came. I thought I was going to be released then. Nothing happened. Christmas came. I thought I was going to be released, but nothing happened. But mind you, I had stated that the First Step Act was hanging in the balance. But the First Step Act was dealing with now accounting rehabilitative efforts to receive good time credits. But at the last minute, it was amended to make retroactive the 2010 guideline changes, lowering it from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1. So once that took place, my attorney, Michael Hawley, filed a petition with the district court saying now that you've returned Mr. Charles back to prison because it wasn't made retroactive, it is now made retroactive. And then I was released on January 3rd of 2019. Well, I was released in January 3rd, 2019. Then about a week and a half afterwards, I ended up receiving a text from my attorney and saying that it was from the White House. And I didn't know what it was about. And at the time, once I got back in touch with the administration, they was giving me an invitation to come to the State of the Union. So I was like blown away, and they was like, "Do you want to go?" I was like, "Yeah, I want to go."
I
You know,
bet. I bet. That's cool.
So I was able to go to Washington D.C. in January, and when I went in January, the State of the Union they didn't have it because there was a government shutdown, so they had to postpone it till February. But while I was there, I was able to go over to the Senate or the Congress and meet the senators and representatives that all played a part in passing the First Step Act. So I was able to go in and have a conversation with them. They was able to clearly see that the reason that I was incarcerated for the length of time that I wasn't that I was just guilty. I was completely guilty. I believe in accountability
Yes, sir.
and personal responsibility. But at the same token, I received a sentence in excess of 25 years just because of the racial disparity between those two drug types.
Yeah, can you expand on that a little bit? Because
Okay.
a lot of people, I mean, I don't know that much about.
Okay.
I was telling you when we were talking earlier, I don't know the difference. I've never seen cocaine, never been around anything like that. But explain it to folks who may be watching.
In the 80s, there was a thing called a war on drugs. And then in the 90s, the early 90s and late 80s, crack cocaine kind of surfaced on the scene. Well, crack cocaine is made from powder cocaine, but you add things to it, baking soda, isotyl and so forth. So it takes powder cocaine to make crack cocaine, but I hate to offend anybody, but in the areas that were white and affluent, they were using powder cocaine. In the projects, the inner cities, and the communities of color, they were using crack cocaine. And at that time, because there was a lack of understanding of crack cocaine, uh, a level of violence that was ascribed to crack cocaine, and then it was believed that Len Bias, who was an aspiring ball player who had just signed a contract, ended up dying from crack cocaine. So crack cocaine was made a higher schedule, well, a higher ratio of 100 to 1 to powder cocaine. But come to find out, Len Bias didn't die of powder cocaine. I mean, crack cocaine. He died of powder cocaine. But still, because there was a misunderstanding of the drug type, as well as the places that this drug was sold and the people that utilized it, we received a sentence that was 100 times what you can receive for powder cocaine. In other words, you can receive, say for instance, I'm going to give you an example. 5 grams of powder cocaine was equivalent to a sentence of 500 grams of crack cocaine. Even though crack cocaine is smaller than the powder cocaine, but the sentence is larger that you receive
Mm.
for it. So by it being 100 to 1, you receive 100 times that amount of punishment for having it than you would the powder cocaine.
Yeah.
And so once it was lowered to 18 to 1, that allowed my sentence to be lessened to 24 years and 7 months, close to 25
Wow.
years.
Wow.
Had it been made 1 to 1, which is what we're trying to get Congress to address now to pass it legislatively, that it be 1 to 1. Because if you're saying in 2010, which is proven fact, science, uh, federal prosecutors, federal judges uh, have all agreed, including Congress when they passed the 2010 Fair Sentencing Act, that the only difference between these two drug types is the racial disparity. And they lowered it from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1. Well, if it is a known proven fact that the only difference is the racial disparity between those two drug types, why is it still 18 to 1 instead of 1 to 1? Well, that's a battle that's,
Well, we
going
were
on today.
talking earlier. When a lot of the folks that you were incarcerated with, you talked about mentoring, which
Right.
I applaud you for your efforts. Where do you see the lack of a lot of fathers in the inner city community and in maybe the trailer parks and at different areas of our culture? Do you think that plays a role in folks that are incarcerated?
I would definitely say so. Uh, if you look at the number of people that are incarcerated, the majority of them have been in, you know, the juvenile system or the foster system or abusive family situations or no father at all. And the majority of them have become addicts or have, through trauma, have mental issues that they're dealing with. So the fact that the community has neglected its role in helping society to rear up these fatherless homes as well as people in that community, period. And I also think that the church has a role to play in that. You know, when we go back to how the Bible actually laid it out, we know that we're supposed to love one another, we're supposed to help one another. But instead, we have allowed that role to be done by the government. And oftentimes, the only avenue that the government has is to take this person away from society and set them apart. And the only way to take them away from society and set them apart is through incarceration. But now we realize with the First Step Act and forward, and with the new opioid epidemic and things like that, is that the way we handled things in the past cannot be the way that we handle things now.
Yes.
And because of that, we have diversionary treatment. We have alternative sentencing to where a person can actually pull up this person's record and see that they've been arrested over and over for small amounts of drug use or for petty theft, shoplifting, things like that to feed their use
Yeah.
and so you know that that person actually has an addiction. Then you ask that person or ascertain whether that person has went through a treatment facility. And if not, you realize that this is maybe what this person
Yeah.
needs as opposed to
Well, I was
incarceration.
asking you earlier. I said, you're a well-spoken, mild-mannered gentleman, and what did you tell me?
Well, I would say that's how I am now.
Yeah.
But prior to that, I would say that I would consider myself to have been a scoundrel. It
Yeah.
wasn't until I met the Lord
So
Jesus Christ.
yeah, what that program cost the taxpayers though?
Which program are you
That
talking
turned
about?
your heart around.
Oh, that was free. That was Christ coming in.
Amen.
Yeah, that was just God reaching down and saying, "Hey, now that I got your attention, this is what I want to tell you.
Yeah, we were.
Something that you had never heard before."
Yeah, exactly. Because you wasn't raised up in church or nothing.
No, I was
No.
far from it. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, the abusive household that I was in, I would say that God was the last thing, period, that ever came and knocked on the door.
Yeah. We were talking um, earlier about your experience with Christ and turn your life around. So that's kind of motivated you to get out here and try to help others. Then.
Oh yeah, that's a
Mm.
strong motivation. The fact that I experienced it myself, I realized that there are thousands, tens of thousands of people that are still incarcerated with exorbitant sentences for crack cocaine. Mind you, even though that it has been changed from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1 in the federal system, a lot of people still have not been given the benefit of the 18 to 1. Then there's a lot of people that are still in the federal system with these large amounts of time that have nonviolent offenses. And in the federal prison, life means life, which is until you expire or die. You
Wow.
know what I mean? You don't leave that till you get a death certificate.
Yeah.
So when somebody on the compound comes to me when I was working in the law library and they would share with me that they got life, to them, that means they don't have a release date. You can
Yeah.
pull up everybody else's name in the federal system and they got a release date. You pull up
Wow.
somebody's name with life and it doesn't have any date there. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So, in other words, when they would come up and ask me and share with me that they have life, I would look at them like, based on whatever age they are, I would say, well, this person got a 100-year sentence. This person got a 200-year sentence. This person got an 80-year sentence
Yeah.
because it's until suspect that person to
Yeah.
die based on whatever age they are.
Well, I know you and I were talking earlier, I was kind of raised up. My dad was World War II.
Mm-hmm.
He was a hardcore military man. And, you had to pull yourself up by your
Mm-hmm.
bootstraps. And, he didn't give you anything. You had to work for everything.
Right.
But what do you tell people that may have been raised up like me? You talked about personal responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
but what do you tell folks that may not have had a pair of boots to pull themselves up with? What do you say with that argument that people got to be responsible, pull themselves up by the bootstraps? What do you say to that?
I would say there comes a level of personal responsibility. When a person commits a crime, they should be held accountable for that crime. Then there comes into play the appropriate sentence for the offense that they committed. Oftentimes, because the sentencing, well, most state sentencing guidelines or federal sentencing guidelines already has a structure of what this person can receive for whatever offense they committed.
Okay.
In my situation, just using that one as an example, I was given a sentence of 30 years to life and I received 35 years.
Wow.
But without the racial disparity attached to it, that sentence would have been anywhere from 8 to 10 years.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, whenever I speak with some legislators, and they be like, well, you committed an offense, you went to jail, you did the crime, you do the crime.
Yeah.
I had no problem with going to jail doing the time for the crime.
Yes, sir.
You know what I mean? At that time. But I didn't want to do a whole additional 13 extra
Yeah, because
years.
while you're there,
That's right.
your
For
mom died and
right.
your
Yes.
dad died.
Yes.
Well, let me ask you this is something before we wrap up. Uh, you know, I was asking you. You're a strong Christian. I appreciate that. And I was asking you this: how does a loving God allow you to spend 21 years in prison? What was your response?
Well, my response is that the life that I was living at that time, I was either going one of two places. One was to prison, the other was the graveyard. God,
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. So God spared my life by allowing me to go to prison. But not only did He spare my life, He got my attention and saved my life. So I look at it from a beneficial standpoint because I didn't even know that this kind of God existed. I
Yeah.
didn't know that God was a loving, forgiving God.
Yeah. Well, you've got a great attitude. I
Oh,
mean, because I think a lot of us, including myself, we all have hardships. I mean,
mm,
a friend of mine the other day lost his wife a couple months ago. I'm sure he's struggling. And, my son was diagnosed with cancer last year, mouth
mm,
cancer, and he's doing okay. But, we all have struggles. And you think, how's a loving God allow hardship? Well, of everybody I've ever known, you probably had the toughest hardship of
mm,
serving 21 years in prison. Um, I'm hoping my fellow lawmakers will watch this because our state we spend about 1.1 billion dollars
mm.
on
Right.
incarcerating folks. That's 1,100 million dollars. That some of that money we can save. It ought to be invested on the front end
That's right.
with whether it's drug treatment programs, mental
Mm-hmm.
health, job skills.
Yeah.
And I think we've got a good governor, Bill Lee. You've met Bill Lee,
Oh, he's a
haven't you?
great man.
Got a good, good heart and a men of valor. Some great
Mm-hmm.
things
Yeah.
that are a mentorship. Well, to just wrap up, the importance of mentorships. What do you think about that then?
I would say mentorship, uh, it often comes into play because, as we stated, a lot of men that are incarcerated, we know women are incarcerated as well, but a lot of men that are incarcerated because they didn't have a big brother, they didn't have a mentor, they didn't have a father figure. So that mentor comes along and it allows them to not only be accountable to somebody, but it allows them to realize that accountability is a good thing. So we definitely need mentors to come alongside people that, like I said, may come from fatherless homes. I may come from homes to where they had a bad example of a father because my home wasn't fatherless, but I had a terrible example of a father figure. And the mentor is able to step in, be alongside, hold this person accountable, help this person talk over situations to where a person just go off of their own thoughts or at a spur of the moment decision and mess up. So I think that a mentor is very important.
Yeah,
And by me being in federal prison, being able to mentor some of the people that were around me, I was just able to show them the love of Christ that I had learned myself
yeah,
because I didn't get it from a personal example of a
Yes.
father figure.
Well, I'm hoping some leaders will watch this. What words would you say to Governor Bill Lee, Lieutenant Governor McNally, Leader Lambert, Chairman Faison, Speaker of the House Cameron Sexton? What do you want to recap and just let them know?
I would say that we got to start looking at everybody as a human being. We still got to show, whether you're a believer or not, you still got to show people love and respect. And we respect everybody regardless of where they are socially, financially. If we just continue to say, especially if we're spiritual, we say that, well, God gave everybody a second chance.
Yes.
Adam messed up. He created a second Adam, which was Jesus Christ, yeah, to right the wrong that Adam did and gave the whole world a second chance. So I would just say that we need people to show empathy. We need people to respect, a person, give them dignity. And once they return to society, make sure that there are available programs that will allow this person to not return to incarceration. Yeah. And oftentimes when a person leaves incarceration, they come out and oftentimes they got a fiend for themselves and they end up being a recidivist because they go right back to the same behaviors they had prior to incarceration. Yeah. But if we have things in play that are able to help them learn a trade or a vocation or some education, which will allow them to contend in the market for a job, then all those things. So I would just say, like I said, I know Governor Bill Lee. I was able to speak with him. I know that he has a heart as a believer to uh, help, as many people as he possibly can. And good programs work. They save taxpayers money. You know what I mean? It's not like by implementing these things that it's going to cost more money. It may cost more on the front end, but in the long run, it's going to, weigh itself out or measure itself
Yeah,
out.
$1,100 million. That'd pay for a lot of certification and college degrees. Well, man, thank you so much for your time today. And I know God's going to use you in a mighty way. He already has. Thank you so much for your time.